The 2024-25 NFL Playoffs. The first game of the playoffs features the Texans hosting the Chargers. The Texans have been pretty abysmal during the second half of the season to the point where the fans are flustered. The fans have even booed the team due to the performance they've seen down the late season stretch. CJ Stroud has had a sophomore slump, throwing more than double the picks he threw last season, over 50 less yards per game, and a dip in passer rating that has him ranked 25th in the league, sandwiched between Caleb Williams and Aiden O'Connell. Meanwhile, the Chargers have been sort of the opposite. Down the backstretch of the season, they've been cooking, going 8-3 in their final 11 games. And that's with the number one ranked scoring defense in the NFL, a night and day difference from last season. What the Chargers do better than anyone is the combination of not turning the ball over while not letting the opponent score many points. Houston is the home team, but I like the Chargers in this one. For the second wildcard game, we are staying in the AFC with a division rivalry. The Steelers at the Ravens. I had recently given the Steelers their flowers for a surprisingly impressive season, but the outlook of this team looks very different now, after the final 4 weeks of the season were brutal. They got blown out in 3 straight weeks, one of which was to the Ravens, who've looked awesome this year. Somehow, Lamar Jackson has put together a more impressive statistical year than his 2019 MVP season, and Derrick Henry ran for nearly 2,000 yards. And you can't forget they have the number one ranked rush defense in the NFL. Not gonna waste any more time here, Baltimore's favored big for a reason, and I'm not gonna get too cute with this pick. I'm going the Ravens. And for the final AFC wildcard matchup, the Bills host the Broncos. Denver has been a pretty awesome story with Bo Nix, who started out rough, but picked up steam as the year went along. And their defense went from 27th in scoring last year to 3rd this season. But let's be real, it would be a massive upset if they beat the Bills in Buffalo. Josh Allen has been on another planet this season, and Buffalo has overall been dominant since mid-October. I love the Bills here. Moving over to the NFC, the Eagles host the Packers in what I think will be a total classic. These two teams kicked off the regular season playing each other in Brazil. Overall, when you look at the team statistics, they look similar on paper. Schematically, their offenses are different, but both lean on the run game and controlling time of possession, both of which are two of the best in the league in those categories. Then defensively, both are great at forcing turnovers and limiting other teams from moving the ball. Also, there are concerns with injuries on both sides, primarily at quarterback. Jordan Love got banged up, forcing him out of their final game, and Jalen Hurts has been out a few weeks due to a concussion. Now, with those things said and assuming both quarterbacks are playing, I like the Eagles here. They just seem really dialed into what they do well. And if this game comes down to the wire, I just trust Philly in the clutch more. Next up is Washington at Tampa Bay. Now this one's interesting. Both teams have been hot at the end of the year, with Tampa going 6-1 down the stretch and Washington going 5-0. And like our last game, these two also played in week 1, which went to Tampa. Now you could go back and forth with statistics and try to make a case for either side, but overall, I like Tampa because they're at home and they've been here before. They have a roster that's very experienced in the playoffs, much more so than Washington. And for the Commanders, as awesome as Jaden Daniels has been, he's still a rookie. It's incredibly rare for rookies to win in the playoffs, with only 12 rookie quarterbacks in NFL history that have started and won a playoff game. For the last of the wildcard round, the Rams host the 14-win Vikings, which is the most by a wildcard team ever. But as impressive as this season has been for Minnesota, that final game was eye-opening. Sam Darnold had one of his worst games of the season, missing on a huge number of throws, and overall looked closer to the version of him that played in New York. I have been singing his praises throughout the season, but that was rough. Honestly, I see this next game as a win-win for the organization. If he balls out and they win, awesome. If Darnold struggles and they lose, well, then they have an easier decision to make on him moving forward. Looking at the Rams, their stats don't jump off the page. They have a negative point differential and are ranked in the bottom half of the league in scoring offense and defense. With that said, they were extremely banged up early in the season. Before resting starters in week 18 though, they had completely turned their season around. After starting 1-4, they went 9-2 in an 11-game stretch, which included defeating the Bills. Now, we saw these two teams face off early in the season, which saw the Rams prevail after they took control in the 4th. Ultimately, I really think this game comes down to this. Do you trust Sam Darnold to bounce back or not? I think the Vikings are the better team, but if he plays erratic like he did versus the Lions, it could spell disaster. Personally, I would bet on him bouncing back and playing well. Every bad game he's had this year, he's played well the following week. So because of that, and just believing in the Vikings roster, I say Minnesota wins here. So, with all the wildcard games decided, here's what the divisional round would look like with these results. Looking first at the AFC, the Bills would be hosting the Ravens in what would be one of the most epic playoff games in recent memory. We have only seen these two teams with their current quarterbacks and regimes match up once in the postseason. Of course, that was 4 years ago, and we can't take too much from that game, considering how much different these teams look. A more relevant example of these two teams playing happened earlier in the year when the Ravens dominated 35-10. That's the only time Buffalo truly got punked all season, but it was on the road. Now, at home, a January game in Buffalo could mean anything. Overall, this should be one of the more entertaining games of the entire season. And if I had to choose, I'd have to go with Buffalo. Josh Allen has simply been awesome in the playoffs in the past, while Lamar has struggled. Although I hope he overcomes his playoff woes and makes this a barn burner. The other AFC divisional matchup would have the Chiefs hosting the Chargers. These two division rivals were neck and neck in their two regular season matchups, both of which saw the Chiefs prevail. Statistically, the Chiefs might be the least impressive 15-win team we've seen. I'm not saying they're bad, it's just crazy how things look on paper. Their point differential is more representative of a 9-8 team, considering they are closer to the Bengals than the Chargers in that category. But whatever numbers say, does it really matter with the Chiefs? They are back-to-back Super Bowl champions, and people were talking about how bad they looked last season. To pick against the Chiefs at this point would defy logic. So I'm going the Chiefs here. Moving over to the NFC, the Eagles would be hosting the Bucs in a rematch from last season, and from earlier in the regular season, which had the Bucs winning big both times. Although this time around, the Bucs don't have home field advantage, and Philly looks much more formidable than they did, and Chris Godwin is out. I think the weather could play a huge role potentially, and I think Philly is more well built for frigid temps and potential inclement weather. In warm weather or a dome, I take Tampa. But since this game's in Philly, give me the Eagles. And for our last divisional game, we got our rematch from Week 18, the Lions hosting the Vikings. The Lions truly had the Vikings number in Week 18, which helped re-solidify our opinions on Detroit. This is the best offense in the NFL, and if their defense can play how they did in Week 18, they are going to be nearly impossible to beat. Oh, and they're going to get Knuckles back? Give me the Lions here. Moving on to championship weekend, the AFC title game, the moment every Bills fan has been waiting for, their chance to beat Kansas City and advance to the Super Bowl. The Bills managed to be the only team to beat the Chiefs at full power during the regular season, but the Chiefs have had their number in the playoffs year after year. Is there any reason to think that things will go differently this year? Well, it is worth noting that if they go to overtime, both teams will have a possession no matter what. Honestly, I think it's time. The Bills are winning this thing, stunning the Chiefs in Arrowhead and advancing to the Super Bowl for the first time since 1994. For the NFC Championship, the Lions host the Eagles in what should be a total war. I think these are the two best rosters in the NFL. And honestly, my gut says that if this was outdoors, perhaps in ugly weather, Philly wins this game. But it's in a dome, with a team and fan base hungry for their first Super Bowl appearance ever. Not gonna overthink this one, I like Detroit here. This means we have a potential Super Bowl for the ages. A matchup between the Bills and Lions would be the stuff of legend. Two franchises that have yet to win a Super Bowl, and in this scenario, one would finally prevail. Interestingly enough, when these two teams played back in Week 15, they combined for over 1,000 total yards and 90 total points, resulting in the highest scoring game of the entire NFL season. With the top two scoring offenses in the NFL, this has potential to be a pretty entertaining Super Bowl. And who do I think will come away with the victory? Give me the Lions winning their first Super Bowl ever. This would make Dan Campbell a legend, Detroit a city of winners, and Jared Goff completing one of the most awesome career arcs we've seen, going from unwanted scraps in LA after failing to win a Super Bowl to a hero in the Motor City.
And he was Fake it to him this time. They got a wide open target. It's one of the linemen. It's Skipper to the end zone for the touchdown.